Welcome to the Commercial Property Podcast. My name is Suzi Carter. I am a chartered surveyor. I've been involved in commercial property in the UK for 30 years and I've done hundreds of commercial property deals. I'm here to be your guide through the commercial property market, whether you're an experienced investor or whether you're literally thinking about dipping your toe in the world of commercial real estate. I will be here talking to you about all kinds of things commercial real estate in the UK, and I've also got some fantastic guest experts who are joining me. So please do subscribe if you'd like to follow, and if you'd like any more help or information on commercial real estate, please do click www.suzicarter.com, which is my website, and you can find out all the ways I can help you. So stay tuned for this week's episode. So today I'm going to talk to you about offices. So last podcast we talked about retail. I'm going to take you on a little journey through some of the main sectors in commercial. Today we're going to talk about offices. And I probably don't need to tell you what's happened in the office market as a result of COVID. So COVID didn't change anything. What it did was accelerate generational trends. And, you know, all the trends that have changed in retail, all the changes that have happened in offices were going to happen anyway. They were just going to happen much later than they did. So we've now got a situation. It's a really interesting one in the office market because we've got this real fundamental change in work patterns. Now, I know that some businesses are moving their staff back into work, and you know, there's 3-line whips about 4-5 days in the office. Really, I think they are really the exception at the moment. In the city, really, it's a Tuesday to Thursday culture now, rather than a Monday to Friday, which it was previously. And of course, there's knock-on effects of that. There's knock-on effects to all the related, the shops, the transport, all kinds of things. That there's knock-on effects because people aren't travelling into cities and towns to work for those days. Now, again, there's always exceptions to every rule, but working from home and a different way the office is being used. So it's not just about working from home. Obviously, that is a thing. And, you know, if you haven't got enough room in your house, you're going to want to be going to book some office space out, maybe in a flexible working space. So obviously that market has really risen. So, you know, if you're looking for niches, if you want to be pretty hands-on with your business, I would suggest then something like a flexible office space where you can create a real community of small businesses is a nice model, but it is a hands-on model. But yes, the way that workspace is being used is different. So businesses are having to almost entice their employees to go back into the office. So you see a lot more collaborative working. You see the way the office is designed is quite different. And what we're now seeing is basically a move to grade A space. So it's grade A space versus everything else. So what does that mean? Well, grade A space is basically relatively new build or new build development space, develop space, office space, where there's really high specifications. The renewable credentials are second to none. So blue chip companies like it because not only can they save energy, but their ESG type targets can be achieved by being in that particular location. You know that if you take a 15 to 20 year lease, that in 15 to 20 years, it's probably not going to be in too bad a nick because it's a new office building. And, you know, it's a building that people want to visit. It's a building that encourages you to be able to recruit new employees that existing employees want to travel to. Because it's, you know, it's fancy, it's got all the facilities, it's in the right location. And I'm not just talking about London here, I'm talking about nationwide, you know, in our regional cities. And that kind of grade A office space is really now the territory of big funds and property companies. And it's a very, very popular investment class. You know, there's a levelling up agenda moving out of London. So cities like Leeds, Manchester, Birmingham are really benefiting from this kind of this move out, not only of government departments, but also companies like the BBC, lots of others moving out to these regional cities, and that's where the demand is coming from. And you're able to get longer leases, you'll get blue chip covenants. You'll tend to let the properties, if not as a whole, then very much floor by floor, or someone taking 2 or 3 floors of it. It'll be in the heart of the action. It'll be near the cool bars and restaurants. So it's got a lot to be said for it. Really highly spec'd, very highly spec'd renewables as well in the buildings, and very attractive asset class. It's very, very top end type investment. So it's got this race to grade A space. And the problem with the grade A space is there's not that much development happening. We have a development pipeline that's being built out now, and then there's a lot of nervousness amongst developers and their backers to continue office development, because we all know what's happening in the office space. And so that kind of grade A space is relatively limited now. And actually what we have a lot more of is the grade B, the grade C and below. And really, I'm going to lump them all together and call them secondary offices. So what are secondary offices? Well, obviously they will vary in size, shape, type, location, but effectively they are anything in this market. They are anything other than grade A space. They are second-hand offices. They may still have leases on them. So, for a landlord, they will know that potentially there's a problem coming, but if you've still got a tenant in that property occupying under a lease, you don't need to worry about it for the time being. But you probably know that when they leave, it's unlikely either you'll get the rents, or you'll even be able to find anybody. There's secondary offices lying vacant all over the UK right now. So they were probably occupied either as a whole or floor by floor by blue chip type companies. They might be kind of smaller companies, more medium-sized companies, but they're just not suitable for modern office requirements. The specification isn't good enough. So when I talk about specification, what I mean is things like the lighting levels, the suspended ceilings, raised floors, big windows, heating and cooling, all that kind of stuff. And as I said earlier, renewables as well. It's a really, really important part, because operators are looking to reduce their energy costs, but they're also, especially if they're blue chip, they're trying to reduce improve their ESG credentials and reduce their carbon footprint. So it's really important to them to have these kind of highly spec renewable offices, carbon neutral or whatever, ground source heat pumps, and loads of other kind of innovative renewable solutions. So these secondary offices, they probably could have been owned by the funds, the property companies, and leases have come to an end. And you're seeing them in auctions right, left and centre. If you look at any auction now, you're going to see this big office space, probably built in the 80s, 90s, 2000s, just not fit for purpose anymore, not suitable for modern office requirements, and probably need quite a lot of money spending on them, to refurbish them, respec them, and the rents you're going to get back for that, or the covenants or the lease lengths are just not going to match the money that's needing spent on it. So what do you do with it? What do you do with those secondary offices? So I'm going to leave you with that little question just for a second. So the thing is that where there's a problem in commercial property, and hopefully if you've listened to this podcast before, you will kind of start recognize this. If you're a contrarian investor, if you observe the problems, and obviously they're very real problems, but then you can find solutions. That's how you can make some serious money in commercial. So these secondary offices, they are probably the only sector now that actually is still going down in price in the UK. So we're now kind of bubbling along the bottom. Some sectors like out of town retail, some industrial is starting to kind of emerge from the shadows and starting to increase in value. But the secondary office market is still falling. Yields are still moving out. And we're definitely seeing, a lot of distress in that sector. So first of all, where we find distress, obviously we find great pricing, we find motivated sellers. There's a reason why a lot of this kit is being sold in auctions. It's because it's easier to sell. It should be easier to sell in an auction. And, people maybe won't be doing quite as much due diligence. I had a horrifying statistic the other day that something like 80% of people that buy an auction haven't even looked at the legal pack. That's really, really scary. It might be slightly lower, but it's there or thereabouts. So, that's pretty scary. So obviously it makes auctions easier to sell in if you've got those kind of people buying property. So, they've gone down a lot in price. They're still continuing to go down in price. And so therefore, anywhere we find distress, there's opportunity. But of course, why do we want to buy this kind of property if we can't find tenants? There's a reason these investors are selling out of these kind of offices, and that's because they can't find tenants. Well, the answer to that is there's multiple other uses you can use for these offices. Now, when I'm talking about offices, I'm not necessarily even talking about big footprint type, big 1990s offices, although that could fall, we'll talk about those in a minute, and we, they could fall in this category. We could talk about upper floors of retail or upper floors of a Class E unit. They can be repurposed, or they've been used as offices. We could talk about small kind of little office blocks on a high street. So there's a huge range of these kind of secondary office blocks. Now, we've already talked about one use, which is flexible offices. So serviced offices where you rent a desk and may or may not be the same desk every day. There's facilities there, kitchen, loos. Somebody else is managing it. You get an entry code for the door. Sometimes there's a social night out. They'll tell you about all the local kind of business group musings and, kind of a real kind of community. Obviously, at the top end of those, we've got people like Regis who have been going for a very, very long time. And in fact, they started out around the time that I started out in property. So kind of 30 odd years ago, they've been going. And then obviously you've got local operators that have sprung up. Now, what you tend to find in some locations, especially in the southeast, is that there's been a lot of conversion of offices to resi. So that obviously is another use potentially. Converting offices to residential. There was a permitted development right Class O, going back to the early 2010s, and the people who, unfortunately not me, I was in the corporate world then, but the people who kind of developed at that point, they really have cleaned up. They bought for very low prices and converted to residential, and through this Class O consent, the conditions weren't as great as they are now as well. So definitely there's potential to convert to residential, but like I always say with commercial, you don't have to convert to another use to get this kind of stuff away. And because there's been a lot of conversion in I'm talking about the southeast here, but it will be in other locations as well. There has been quite a shortage of secondary offices in some locations, and there is still demand. There's some demand from accountants and solicitors and all kinds of people. So there are some locations, some kind of wealthy towns, especially as I say in the southeast, where there potentially is demand for secondary offices, and you don't need to do anything to it because actually there is demand. So this is about niching. It's about understanding your market, and it's about making sure that you kind of really understand market dynamics, find out about local markets, walk the streets, Google office space for rent. Is there any? Google office space for sale. Look at who the main operators are. Speak to local agents. You can find this information out pretty quickly. So you can just keep it as is. In some locations, there's just demand for offices. You don't need to do much to it, and that's great. And obviously, the beauty of that is that we always look at our multiple exits. And so if we're looking at multiple exits, then, there is a potential to convert to residential along the line. You don't have to do it now necessarily, but there is a potential to do it later. So definitely look at the potential of just keeping offices as offices in areas where a lot of the supply has been soaked up.
This episode is brought to you by Bond Finance Limited, your trusted partner for commercial property mortgage solutions. Are you an experienced residential property investor about to diversify into commercial property, looking for funding options? Bond Finance can help. Whether you're planning to expand, refinance, or make a major property investment, Bond Finance provides expert advice with access to a wide range of lenders, from high street to specialist. Book a free discovery session today to explore how we can tailor commercial funding solutions to your unique investment strategy. Visit www.bondfinanceltd.co.uk and take the next step in your commercial finance journey.
But what else can you do with these secondary offices? Well, you can put in there commercial in multiple occupation. So commercial in multiple occupation basically means splitting the space into small suites. So, whilst there might not be demand for the whole property, there might not be demand for floor by floor, there probably is demand for a small suite. And it doesn't have to be, a flexible office space. It could be a business that wants to rent it, but it could also be a local chiropractor or a physio or a beauty therapist. You'd be amazed at the amount of Botox therapists that want to take space in offices. Obviously, you may need to do a bit of a refurb, or you certainly will need to divide the space up. But everything from storage to health, maybe even some childcare uses. Offices, all kinds of uses can go into these commercial in multiple occupation. And bank finance likes multi-let units, multiple occupation. They like it because the mortgage is being paid by more than one tenant, so all the eggs aren't in one particular basket. So it's really interesting how this can really work in lots of different angles, from a finance angle, from a tenant demand angle, because really that's the most important thing. What's a tenant demand? Will they take leases? Will they take 3-5 year leases? What kind of rent will they pay? And what's the covenant of the tenant like? And yes, you're not going to get blue chip tenants, but actually you'll probably get some really good local business in there, especially if there's really good demand, who potentially want to make this their base and to run their operations from there for the next few years. And what's not to like about that? So there's definitely some angles in this commercial in multiple occupation type space. So don't discount that as an angle, because you can pick this kind of kit up for really cheap prices at the moment, and there is definitely potential to repurpose it. Obviously, you need to make sure you understand from commercial agents what the sweet spot is of the office suites. You could advertise this through local agents. You can advertise this on Facebook Marketplace. You could advertise it locally on local channels like Nextdoor, etc. And definitely I'd recommend putting some dummy ads, doing some local get some local intel about what the demand is, what occupiers are looking for. Go and look at the competition, understand it. Is there any competition at all? If there's not, that's probably a pretty good sign. And really kind of get under the skin of it before you kind of take the leap. But local agents should be able to help you with that, and you should be able to do your own market research on that. And then obviously make sure the numbers stack, and also speak to your broker before you go ahead with it, just to make sure that it's financeable, what the terms would be, what the loan to values would be as well. And then of course, if you did want to do a conversion, there's plenty of permitted development rights that allow you to do that. If you want to do that later on, we always want multiple exits. So, the multiple exits in this case, first of all, can you let as a whole? Can you let floor by floor? If not, can you let as a CMO or as a flexible working space? Can you do a conversion to whatever that might be, whether that's mixed use or purely residential or whatever else? So this commercial and multiple occupation can be a really interesting strategy. Now, if you're looking at these kind of properties to convert to residential, as many of you know, that's not something that I do as a strategy, and it's not. I do teach it, but it's quite top level. What I do is I specialize in keeping commercial as commercial. But if you are looking at the potential of converting to residential, you should get that costed. You should understand the viability of that, whether you do that now or in the future. And you've got to be careful on these big footprint offices, the really big offices that have got big floor plates, because if you're looking at residential, then daylight sunlight, especially in the middle of the building, can really kind of put the mockers on the ability of getting planning for residential in that space. So I definitely think there's some legs for mixed use buildings where you can maybe put some commercial in the middle and then residential around the outside. That commercial could be a gym, health, maybe even some shared office space, shared, whatever else it might be, shared health space or whatever with commercial tenants. Or you can put a light core in there, but that's expensive. So I would definitely recommend that you look at the commercial angles first. But if you were to ask me which one of the biggest opportunities really in the market is at the moment in price wise, purely price wise, I would say that commercial offices is definitely secondary commercial offices is definitely something worth exploring as a niche. Now, obviously, we can explore niches. You don't have to go down that route. And also, this is going to work in some locations and not in others. It's going to work best in locations where there's not a great deal of this space. I've got clients pursuing this strategy, and they've tried 3 or 4 locations before they found the sweet spot of places where this works. And obviously, just make sure that you observe the competition coming in as well, and make sure that you understand kind of the future pipeline of this kind of space. So offices is a really great, really interesting price-wise in terms of buying prices, and pounds per square foot in terms of, purchases. Find them in auctions, find them advertised on some of the main portals, definitely find them off market where agents will probably have price on application because they don't want to kind of materialize really low prices in the market. So don't be surprised if they're not price on occupation. But the most important thing is to understand tenant demand, look at the multiple exit uses and understand that tenant demand of offices. Changing market, some fantastic opportunities across the board, but just make sure that you do your due diligence.